The previous basket is under review.
Hello, friends, and welcome to the Basket Under Review podcast. I am your host, Eamonn Brennan of Buzzer at EamonnBrennan.com, and also of Basket Under Review, the home of the best and most in-depth college basketball content you will find anywhere. Brand new website, just a few months old, and really getting ramped up for the start of the 2025-26 season. It's already going to be 2026 next year. That's crazy. Our guest today is Blake Lovell, but before we get to Blake and a big SEC breakdown, we've been breaking down every high major conference in a whole ton of depth the past few weeks, and Blake's our next victim of this podcast process. Before we get to him, I want to encourage everyone to go check out Basket Under Review. Obviously, if you sign up for a subscription, you not only support this show and the work we're doing on the podcast, you get access to the site, which is just chock full every day of a massive amount of really in-depth content. You support the other shows that we're doing, including a brand new one called Weekend in Review with Matthew Winnick and Brian Ralph. It's going to be a lot of fun, particularly as they get into the season and sort of immediately review, all the big college hoops weekends. You also get access to the Discord, Trilly Donovan's Discord, where he breaks news and where the communities and the channels are very lively and vibrant. And there's a lot of lore that I don't always understand, but I do my best to keep up. So go check out Basket Under Review, check out the Discord, sign up, support the show. And thank you for being here. We're excited for people to see the website and everything we get up to as the season starts. Really quickly, I also need to mention our sponsor, Homefield, homefieldapparel.com. It's the best place to get amazing college sports gear, old vintage retro style stuff that, actually looks cool and doesn't look like you bought it for $5 outside a tailgate because you forgot to bring your shirt to the football game or the basketball game. Check out Homefield. Amazing stuff. Thank you to Homefield for sponsoring our show. Okay, Blake, we're in it. How you doing, man? Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Eamon. I mean, it's like one of those where, like you said, like we're about to play basketball here soon, like for real. And it feels like every off season we say this, but like it's just, like it's wild. For like not long ago, I was talking about, I don't know how the SEC got 14 teams in the tournament. Now I'm like, oh yeah, they're about to start a new season. So, it should be a fun discussion for sure with this league.
Yeah, it's been a fun sort of rise for the SEC. Obviously, last year it really culminated, but it's been happening over a few years. I mean, Blake, you're you're an SEC basketball analyst for Southeastern 16, which focuses primarily on the SEC, as folks might imagine. I'm kind of curious what your experience has been, sort of personally and, professionally, et cetera, with the rise of the league. Like, how did you become the guy who, for example, Bruce Pearl retires in the middle of, what was it, late September, I guess. And you're, hopping on a stream, ready to talk about it right away. And, essentially the heart of college football season. Like, have you always been a big basketball guy, or have you gone along on the ride with the conference? Like, how have you kind of evolved with that?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been a big basketball guy, and I think it's, it's one of those where, like, in this field, I'm starting out, this was, oh goodness, probably 15 or more years ago, and it's like, you're doing the blog site thing, and you're trying out everything, you're like, how do I make this work, and how do I survive in this field, and so, I went that route for a while and just tried out a lot of stuff. I've always been a big basketball guy, like that was my thing in high school, and I got into coaching and even was a referee at one point. So, boy, that was an interesting experience. But, yeah, I got out of that quickly. So, so like I was like, okay, I need to do something with basketball. And so, when I was coaching, I'd go to like the coaching clinics and stuff in the summer, and I would go help, college stuff too. So like at Vanderbilt, I'm in Nashville. And so I'd go and just say, hey, can I help coach at like your youth camp or something, right? And so that's where like I got connected with Kevin Stallings and that crew. And so like at that point, I'm like, all right, like this is kind of cool, like to see how things work, and you get to know guys at coaching at this level and all that. And so I'm like, okay, well, I'm not going to be a coach probably. I just didn't see it happening. And so I'm going to just go back to writing and see if I can make this work with the SEC. And so I always tell it, I'm like, it's the funniest story, because the first year I started doing this, I started a site on my own, just, hey, I'm just going to see what happens, right? And it was 2015-16. That's the year the SEC got 3 teams in the tournament. And I'm thinking, what have I done here? Like, am I seriously considering that this is going to be something I put my time into? And so, fast forward a year later, that's where Florida and South Carolina are playing in the Elite Eight. Carolina makes their run to the Final Four and all this, and I'm like, all right, I'm seeing the path here. And then, I mean, as you know, everything just changes once you get into transfers and NIL and all this stuff. And so, yeah, it's been wild to kind of see just over this, I guess it's a decade now, just how different it was than when I started and just was like, hey, I'm just going to write about SEC and do a podcast and see what happens. So,
yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you bring up that particular season, because I remember going to the SEC Media Day in Birmingham before the following year, and it was John Calipari at the press conference holding court as sort of the reigning king of the SEC at the time, and honestly chiding everyone else in the league. Schedule better, it's a team effort. Really almost borderline condescending, right? Like, I mean, it was not, but his point, understandably, was everybody else has to, it can't just be 4 or 5 teams at the top of the league that make you a good conference. The way leagues are judged, particularly in the modern era, it's kind of pound for pound strength all the way to the bottom. And you can have teams that drag you down. That, I think, what that year coincided as well with the NCAA hiring someone, his name, I believe is Greg Shaheen, who used to work at the NCAA, to come in and help teams schedule, basically as like a consultant, to help teams schedule better in the non-conference, with the understanding of how that would affect their schedule strength going into conference play. There was a big push from the conference office well before the NIL and portal stuff came into the game of, hey, look, we may not be the best college basketball conference in the country, but we got to make a little bit more of a fist of it. And so then I think you went from that sort of effort to an increasing number of good coaches getting hired, a bit more resources being put into places they maybe wouldn't expect. I think Ben Howland at Mississippi State was a great example of the kind of guy. It's like, okay, like Mississippi State, like that's a pretty big hire. He had mixed success there, and his last few years at UCLA weren't great, but like that's a guy who had teams in the Final Four at one of the big programs in college basketball. And so it was a gradual climb into, and then, yeah, like you said, you get into the NIL portal era, and you get coaches coming along, and the sort of all coincides with, I think, up and down the league, really good hires, a lot more resources, better buildings, better facilities, and just an overall sort of growth, sort of organically over time. And then, lo and behold, you look last year and the SEC is arguably the best conference we've ever seen in college basketball, which, again, you go back 10 years and that's just, no one would have been thinking anything like that.
No, and like it's funny you bring up the media day too, because that was something I forgot to mention, but I'm like, I can remember a time where SEC basketball media day, like I remember one of the years they held it in Nashville here, and it was walk into Bridgestone Arena. The coaches will just come and sit at a table like you're having lunch, and you've got 5 or 6 media guys like just sitting there asking questions. Like I'm sitting there like, it's just me and the usual guys, right? And I'm like, this is media day for the SEC? Like, it's not, you know what I mean? Like, it's not.
Meanwhile,
like
you go to football media day and it's like
right.
the Super Bowl or something.
Yeah. And I'm like, this is SEC basketball media day. But like at the time, that's exactly what it was, is that there just was not the amount of coverage that was necessary because the league was where it was. And, obviously that's changed considerably. Like this year, they're doing the 2-day thing where they're combining the men's and the women's, and it's a big deal. There's a lot of people there. And so, now when you just kind of look at where it's at, I mean, it is just so wild how different it is. And I think, like it's a situation now where, the demand is there in terms of seeing the resources that everyone has put in. You mentioned kind of just, hey, we have to schedule better. The late Mike's Live was such a big part of that. And then you kind of see the evolution of all the guys who've made a difference since then. Obviously, I couldn't name everyone, but like, of course, Greg Sankey's played a big role in making sure it stayed on track there. But then it's like, Dan Leibovitz came in. I thought he did a great job in that associate commissioner role. Garth Glissman's there now. They're doing a great job with their own like conference scheduling and sort of the demands they have within the conference. And so it's all about, too, and it does go back to like coaches say all the time, right? It's like, can you get players? And for schools, can you just get good coaches? And all of that combination, has sort of come together in the SEC where you feel like, if you got 14 teams in the tournament, I'd say most people feel pretty good about where they're at and being able to accomplish all those things.
Yeah, and it's one thing to get a lot of teams in the tournament. It's another thing to have, two teams in the Final Four and a bunch of number one and number two seeds. And um, there's really not a whole lot to criticize about the SEC's performance last. It's not one of those years where a league gets, the poor Mountain West or whatever will get six
Yeah.
teams in and they'll all lose in the first weekend, and everyone who's like an ACC fan of a bubble team that didn't get in is ragging on the poor Mountain West.
Yeah.
Wasn't the case last year for the SEC. So really, really incredible sort of rise to what the league is now. Before we preview the conference team by team and get in some, to the stories and sort of the nitty gritty of the rosters, obviously we alluded to it before. Big offseason story this year in the SEC came extremely late in the offseason when Bruce Pearl decided to retire, the timing of which was clearly designed to set up his son Steven as the head coach. We've seen this a lot in recent years, from Tony Bennett at Virginia to various other coaches who have an idea of who they want to succeed them, and by retiring when they do, they give that guy a shot. And again, talking about the rise of the SEC broadly, I think Bruce Pearl played a big role in that. You can kind of track his arrival at Auburn with the sort of rise of the modern SEC and the rise of that program. Clearly, from when he got there under Tony Barbie, they were just a mess, a non-entity of a basketball program, essentially. And it took him a couple years, 2-3 years, turn that around. But even before that, going to Tennessee, which was a program with more history than Auburn, but certainly well below football and frankly women's basketball in terms of mind share at that university for most of my adult life that I can remember anyway. And so, that was an original proof of concept there. I think it's like, hire someone really good with a ton of energy, and it kind of doesn't matter what school you're at. Like, you can get to a certain level and then build on it, build facilities, build a new building, as Auburn did. There's a whole range of outcomes available to you if you hire well and then eventually get behind whatever coach you're talking about. I'm wondering kind of how you view his legacy within the conference and what he kind of meant, as I've as sort of said, to what the modern SEC has become.
I mean, I mentioned all the office basically guys that played a big role in the growth of SEC basketball. I think you could certainly argue that he is right there at the top in terms of like coaches, like other people, right outside of just your main office staff, just because of all the things you said. Like, he was someone who came in, completely rejuvenated Tennessee, and I think it's just it's the combination of, you said it, the energy, the personality, like all those things. The guy's taking his shirt off and he's cheering at the women's games and all this stuff. Like, not everybody's going to be able to go out and hire that guy. Like, that guy doesn't exist everywhere. But I think what he brought was not just, a reinvigorated Tennessee program. If you were one of the other teams and you're saying, all right, we want our program to get to what looks like a pretty fun and entertaining environment, no matter what you thought of him, right? It's like, hey, they're putting on a product that seems pretty entertaining to watch. You wanted your team to beat this guy, because it's like, hey, I don't want to just sit back and be able to do this and watch him just have all the success, which he did at Tennessee, which he did at Auburn. You brought up, I mean, that program was done for. I mean, when he took over, and the fact that, again, it's not, I always say it's like not a knock on Auburn, but like the fact that he did what he did at Auburn is one of the most impressive feats in the history of SEC basketball, just because he was able to bring, again, something completely different that the program had sort of never seen. I know they had the success under Cliff Ellis and all that, but like, this was just something different in terms of what he had at the beginning, what he was able to mold it into. And at the same time, I still think, when I go back and say he's one of the guys that maybe is very high on the list of people who are responsible for the growth of SEC basketball. I don't just say that as someone who, look, Bruce was probably the best there was in terms of promoting my work back when I was just, a complete nobody starting in 2015-16 when they're only winning, 10 or 11 games or whatever. Like, he's still helping promote the sport. And I think when you look at it this way, Bruce Pearl played a huge role in Alabama basketball becoming what Alabama basketball became, right? Because of,
that's interesting.
you know what I mean? Like, it's the domino effect of, hey, I mean, yes, Avery Johnson was there, had some success, but like if you're Alabama at the time and you're looking up and you're seeing things start to turn with Auburn to where they look like a Final Four team, and ultimately they wind up making there a couple times, that impacts that program because they go out and get Nate Oates, and now look what's happened. And I think again, you just see that everywhere where he was just someone that I thought just played a huge role in this league's success. And I know again you can't maybe measure that with data or anything, but like if you think about the impact and what he made other programs do because of the success he was having, how many times in his era were people chasing after what Bruce Pearl's teams were doing in the SEC? And like it became that point. And so yeah, I mean, it's a huge blow, I think, to the SEC period. But obviously, it's something where I don't know that you're going to find anybody that was able to have that kind of success at Auburn and do it the way that they were able to do it and get to a couple Final Fours and all that. Just given the fact that I remember those days watching that team at the beginning and knowing what it looked like before he took over. So yeah, I mean, just an unbelievable impact, I think, overall.
Yeah, I mean, look, I wrote this on my newsletter. The day he retired, there are a lot of people who don't like Bruce Pearl.
Yeah,
Illinois fans, namely, other
right.
people in college basketball. I think there are some people out there who, even if they didn't know a single thing about the Deion Thomas story or his years in exile, would know that he, got show caused at Tennessee for lying to the NCAA or asking other people to, or a combination of both. I think all of that you can, I think, to me anyway, put in the same bucket of his core characteristic that also drove his success at the same time, which is just relentlessness. And that can be a quality that takes you to the top of the sport and makes you an incredible recruiter and a constantly energetic person who was willing to go to frat houses and people's, politics 101 classes and tell them, come to the games, we need you there, blah, 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 do all this salesman stuff all the time. It can also be the thing that says, I can't lose my job over this. I got to make sure everybody's, got their story straight on this NCAA thing. And it all goes in the same bucket. But again, the impact is undeniable. You look at Tony Barbie's last 3 seasons, his 4 seasons, 234th in KenPom, 147th, 197th, 122nd. Bruce gets there, it's 139, 189, 82nd, and then they're a 4 seed. And they never really look back. And next thing you know, they've got lottery picks coming in. They've got a new building that they're building, and it's one of the best gyms in the country. And that's just, part of the impact that he had. And I think it's right. And I think you're smart to mention the impact on other programs, Alabama specifically, but I think other ones too, of just like, hire a good coach. Vanderbilt, hire a good coach. And boom, look what happens, like it is a replicable thing if you have the right guy. It's fundamentally, programs all across the country in all kinds of different leagues struggle with status anxiety and, oh, do we have enough resources to compete? And I think at the end of the day, if you hire the right guy, you prove that you can, and that's been a big factor in the SEC's success. I mean, so the next question then is obviously, and maybe it's an unanswerable one at this point, what do we make of Auburn moving forward now with Stephen Pearl? Because I think Stephen Pearl has a really good reputation in, at least from everything I've heard, in the sport in terms of his work on Auburn's defense as an assistant coach. I think a lot of people respect what Auburn's defense has become. There's also a part of me that thinks, look, Bruce Pearl's team's always played good defense. That's kind of always been his thing. And so it's a little hard for me to tease out what is his son's influence versus what was going to be there anyway. And so what do you make of where the program goes from here? And, obviously the transition is interesting because it sounded like, by all accounts, there was a desire sort of to give Stephen a head coach in waiting tag, similar to Kellen Sampson at Houston under his father, Kelvin. Didn't get that, but the school still gave him a 5-year contract in this transition, which is at least some sign of faith. Coach, Auburn can buy out a college basketball coach if they want to. But it's much more than like, yeah, okay, you're the interim coach. We'll give you a 2-year deal and then we'll see how it goes. So I'm curious what you make of the whole situation moving forward.
Yeah, and the word I've used since I think we started, talking about this after Bruce retired is just I said, look, I don't think this is a demeaning term, but like it's going to be different. And I don't necessarily care that it's the coach's son. It's a different situation now with him. And people have asked, it's like, okay, like statistically, what are going to be some of the things that you think will carry over? And I'm like, I mean, here's the thing. I was having a tough time with Auburn going into this season just for the fact alone that this is a completely new team outside of Todd Pettiford,
Right.
than the one that everybody was talking about getting, AARP cards and all this other stuff last year, right? Of how old they were and all
My
this.
guy,
And
Chad
like,
Baker Mazzara.
yeah. And I'm like, so it's completely different. And that was already going to be, I think, the theme of the season for them. And I won't spoil kind of as we go through the teams, but like I was looking at, all right, to me, that feels like there were 6 teams that were kind of up there in that upper echelon. And I kept kind of moving Auburn back to like that number 6 role. And it's just because I think there were unknowns, even with Bruce Pearl as the coach, of just how different it was going to be than it was last year. I mean, that was a team that was multiple years in the making in terms of, again, the age and the experience and just everything that they had put together to get to that point. But now it's like, let's call it what it is. It's someone who doesn't have head coaching experience at this level. Yes, I know that Stephen Pearl has obviously been with Bruce for many years in terms of learning from him and all this other stuff. And so that's where I will kind of go to that side and say, I think there's a chance he can have a lot of success because you mentioned it. Like, this is a guy who was kind of playing the defensive role. They still have Mike Burgomaster there, who's been, I think, just, you want to talk about unsung heroes. I mean, offensively, what he's been able to do, I think, and especially, again, you go back to last year, I mean, he is one of those, rising guys in the industry that just having him on the staff is an incredible asset for Stephen Pearl now. And just the staff as a whole, whether it comes to recruiting and all this other stuff, they've still got their core all there. And so I think he's going to have a chance to succeed. And look, he does have an SEC Player of the Year candidate in Pettiford. That's a good place to start. And, they're bringing in some really good, talented players on this year's roster. But, it would be hard for any of us to be like, I can say with more than whatever percentage confidence that I think this is going to work, or go the other way and say, well, I can point to every single data point out there and say, there's a good chance this won't work. And so who knows where that answer ultimately falls. But like you said, the 5-year thing, and this is when we were doing the live reaction show after, that was the thing that surprised a lot of people. They're like, they're going to give him a 5-year contract. And so to me, that does say, all right, even though, yes, they could certainly get out of it if they had to, but that does tell you there is some commitment there, and there is something, at least, I think, from Auburn's perspective, that you're looking at this and knowing, too, at least for now, based on what Bruce said, he's staying at the university, is going to be there, in different roles or whatever. Will eventually get to politics? Probably would be my prediction. But, for now, if he's there, that is something where I think also just having Bruce Pearl around is not a bad idea either when it comes to trying to make this transition. And so I think Stephen Pearl can have success, but I think it's also fair to point out, yeah, there are obviously some things that are against him from the jump. Maybe the biggest one of all is he's having to replace Bruce Pearl, and that's not an easy task, no matter whether you're named Stephen Pearl or anyone else. So
yeah, and as bought in as fans are, and as much as they love the guy, they want to win. I mean, you look at North Carolina. North Carolina fans love Hubert Davis as a person. They love the guy, and Hubert Davis loves North Carolina. There's no like bad feeling on a personal level or meanness or bitterness. And he's had some success there, and he's had a couple of years where they've been disappointed. And I think, fundamentally it comes down to, if he doesn't win enough games this year, there'll be a lot of people who think it's time for Hubert to move on, and everyone will shake hands and go in opposite directions. And I think that's kind of similar to where, at least from my sort of vibes based internet consumption, trying to figure out kind of where Auburn fans are on it. Sad about Bruce, but fully, it seems like supportive of Steven coming in, and will be behind him. But you got to win games, and Auburn fans have readjusted themselves to a different standard of success now, and so there will be high expectations there. All right, let's move into the SEC preview portion of the show, because we got a lot to cover. It's a big conference these days. These conferences, like, all right, we're going to preview. Like the Big East is nice because it's like, okay, we got 11 teams, we can get through this relatively quickly. But you get into the ACC and Big Ten and SEC, and it's like, okay, we got almost 20 teams to get through here. But the highlights I want to pull out early that I've been doing on these preview shows. and just going to put this wide open out there for you. Beyond Auburn, which we've obviously just covered, to you, what is the most interesting coaching situation in this league heading into the season? Who is the guy that you think is in a pivotal year, maybe not on the hot seat, but just like on a cusp of something, or whatever, wherever you want to go with it?
Yeah, so like it is an interesting question because I think you could point to some obvious candidates in terms of like, let's say, hot seat potential. Like if things go bad, let's say at South Carolina or LSU, the two teams who didn't make the tournament last year. Let's say it happens again, what we talked about earlier, expectations, right? Everybody wants to, okay, 14 of the 16 got in. Why are we not one of those? And so I could certainly see some heat if things don't go well there. I think Oklahoma is an interesting one with Porter Moser because, even before last year, I feel like there was a lot of sort of chatter. And again, what's true, what's not. It just felt like the fit was off. And you wondered, okay, how are things going to go? Well, they start 13-0. Like, well, all right, we're okay. And then it didn't finish so great. And so I'm like, okay, I feel like it's kind of one of those. But I'm going to give you what I think kind of a wild card answer. And that is Rick Barnes at Tennessee. Because I think he's 71. Speaking of chatter, there was a lot of chatter last year, of course, that there seemed to be, and again, what's true, what's not. I mean, now we know. But it was like, all right, when Zakai Ziegler's out of there, Rick Barnes is retiring. That's it. Because he's
logical endpoint, honestly,
right?
Given how tight he was with that player and how synonymous they are and all that.
And like I was more than 50% certain that was going to happen. Like I was convincing myself that we were going to have a Tennessee basketball coaching search this offseason. It didn't happen. Eventually they came out and said, hey, he's coming back. And I think he even did, an interview like a month ago where he's just kind of explaining that, hey, I'll know when it's time to step aside. And could that be after this year? Maybe. I think he's got a really good team. But, we've talked about these coaches who at some point this era just gets the best of you. He's not really struggling, but like we've seen so many coaches step away at this point that I'm like, I think we're close with Rick Barnes. And so it is kind of fascinating to wonder, could this be the last season? We're not going to know right now for him, but, I think it's at least something to potentially keep an eye on. And I do think maybe it is the most interesting kind of scenario that's out there just because Rick Barnes retires. I mean, you talk about a job opening up that's going to be very, very highly coveted. I think that's where we're at right now with Tennessee basketball. So,
yeah, no, that's a great point. I mean, he has really sort of we talked about Bruce Pearl's work there, but I think he has elevated that job now into, again, another program that you expect to be in the hunt for a number one seed pretty much every year. Mm-hmm. And it's the kind of thing that I don't know. I don't know what I think Tennessee fans really are on board with him. You know what I mean? I don't sense any like discontent, right?
It's just the tournament stuff. Like,
it's just the tournament stuff. But like,
hasn't made a Final Four. Like, there are going to be some that always kind of hold that. And look, I get it, but at the same time, you're telling me you wouldn't take back-to-back Elite Eights right now, like they've done. I mean,
yeah, I
think it's not easy to do. So I think you should be heralded for that. So,
yeah, it's the tournament is. It's not a crapshoot. It's obviously a skill-based game, but all it takes is a couple bounces, and it's Rick Barnes made his first Final Four. What a crowning achievement for a lifelong coach. Whatever. Okay, most interesting player in the league before we get into every team. Who is the guy that you're looking at thinking this guy could elevate his team, or this guy is not as good as everyone says he is, or who's the guy that you're most interested to see how it plays out?
Boogie Flan, because I think it's just a situation where you're coming on to the defending national champions, and you want to talk about off-season chatter. Like, it's just like everybody. We don't even spend any time talking about Florida's front court. It's just a given. We're like, all right, they got the best front court in the country. They got all four of those guys coming back. Good luck, like to anyone. But like the backcourt, it's not Walter Clayton. It's not Will Richard. It's not Elijah Martin. You've got Boogie Flan. You got Xavier Lee, who I think also is probably not getting enough credit coming into the season. They're like, well, he's coming from Princeton. I'm like, go watch the guy. Go watch it. Go look at his numbers.
Oh, he's a good player. Yeah,
he's fantastic. And so I'm like, in Todd Golden's system, he's going to be fine. And then I look at Boogie Flan, And maybe this is just me, again, from an SEC perspective. We have a ton of Arkansas fans. I've heard every single possible angle you could hear on what Boogie Fland is from Arkansas fans. But now that I see him get kind of this fresh start, I think it's going to be fascinating, because if Florida is going to be the team to beat in the SEC, if they're going to have a chance to defend the national title and maybe get back to Final Four and win it again, because I keep bringing up the stat, which people laugh at, but I'm like, last time Florida got to the Final Four, won the national championship, they won again the next year. So I'm like, maybe the trend just falls in their favor, but it's going to be Boogie Fland, I think, that gets them there. And so, to me, he is the one, and I don't even want to call it a wild card, because I think that's acting like that this guy can't play. Of course he can. But if they're going to get back to that level and be at the very top at the end of the season, I think it's going to be because of him. And so I am, talk about how a guy plays in a certain system. Todd Golden's one of the best sort of offensive minds out there, and I am so intrigued to see what they do with him there in Gainesville.
I'm interested in what Arkansas fans have said about Boogie Fland, because you look at his line and you look at his performance last year and you take it in isolation and you're like, efficient, high usage rate, great assist rate, low turnover rate, shot it okay. Not a great finisher maybe on the interior, but his overall contribution was a net positive. But you also look at the arc of Arkansas' season, and when he went out in, what was it, early mid-January, something like that.
Yeah, he goes out in mid-January. They're 0-5 in SEC play, and then they turn things around. Yeah.
Yeah, and then they start looking like they were a team last year, writing Bubble Watch and tracking them, where they were totally out of the picture. And I wrote a thing about how Cal was, wasting one of my favorite players of all time, in John L. Davis, and not getting the best out of this roster, and yada, yada, yada. And then Fland goes down, and all of a sudden it was a slow burn, but it was like, you know what? It's been a long time since Arkansas played badly. Even in the games they're losing by 4, 5, 6 points against really good teams in the SEC. And obviously we saw what happened at the end of the year with how they played, closing out the year and into the tournament. So what are Arkansas fans' take on this?
Well, and I think that was it, right? It's very simple. And we talk about like having the data. You can absolutely look at it and say, hey, I can tell you that we were 0-5 with him, and then we turned our season around. And I think that's where, and you know how this works too, because like anytime a player jumps somewhere else, they're nowhere near
especially
as good
in the league.
Yeah, especially in the league. It's like, forget all that stuff we said about this may be the best player in the history of the program before the season started this past year. He's now one of the most overrated players we've ever recruited. And so, like, that's just how this game works. I get it, but, like, you can't deny the skill, and you can't deny the upside with this guy. And I think the fact is, too, for the longest time there, I think there were some people thinking he's not coming back to college. But to come back as you started to see that momentum, and then all the momentum seemed to be in Florida's favor, I'm just sitting back like, oh, this is going to be interesting, because, you're putting him as one of those guys, or really the guy, him and Lee, that have to replace a backcourt that just completely dominated games at times, just like their front court last year, to help Florida just, go through the toughest path there's ever been, I guess, statistically, to win the national championship. And, I mean, again, I keep telling Florida fans, I'm like, speaking of it being different, like we talked about it with Auburn, it's going to be different for Florida. Like, Lee and Fland, the combination is not the same as the combination of guys you had last year. It's a different skill set, but I still think if you're talking upside, like, you could probably say Boogie Fland top 5 in the league easily, in my opinion, in terms of just pure skill and upside that they have going into this season. So,
yeah. Well, that's a great segue to get into the actual teams, because as I sent you before the podcast started, I've broken out into tiers, as we've been doing on every show except the one with Fanta, because that was just sort of a freewheeling. we were talking about all kinds with John. But so I have Florida as my top team. I'm going to run through these real quick just to give people the lay of the land, so if you're particularly interested in hearing what Blake has to say about Mizzou, you'll know where you are, and you can skip the rest of whatever. But so I've got in my tiers, Lonely at the top is my first tier, and that's just Florida. I've got Contenders, not particularly interesting name, but Kentucky, Tennessee, Alabama, Arkansas. Tournament plans: Vandy, Mizzou, Auburn, Ole Miss, Texas, Oklahoma, Mississippi State. That's a deep cut, but again, this is a league that sent 14 teams to the tournament last year, so there's a lot of possibility there. Someone has to lose games. I've got Texas A&M and Georgia in there. And then I've got surprise us, which is my catch-all term for teams that I don't think are going to be particularly good. I've got LSU and South Carolina. So let's start with Florida. We already mentioned it a bunch, but to me, you already hit on it. The front court is back. The front court is incredible. It's Hawk, it's Alex Condon, it's Chinyelu, it's Hanglotten. Having Hanglotten come off the bench, in theory, is like ridiculous, right? Like that is a national title winning front court. We've already seen it. But the big question is the transition from a 3-guard starting 5 with Walter Clayton, who was obviously incredible. Elijah Martin, I think underrated, also incredible. Will Richard, also very good and underrated throughout their entire season and tournament run. And mixing, they had some bigger lineups last year for sure in moments, but by and large, those 3 guys were on the court for most of the important minutes with 2 of the bigs. And so now you're coming into a season where you're looking at it, and I think from just a pure roster continuity and chemistry standpoint, it's going to be really hard for Todd Golden and his staff to tell any one of those 4 big guys, actually, we're just playing 2 of you again this year, and we're going to split your minutes even, more than like essentially the way we did last year. There's just going to be a desire for playing time for all of them. And it's a different roster look and a different sort of combination of skills that they're going to need to figure out. They're still going to be really good, even if it's like kind of awkward for a little while, but it might be awkward for a little while.
And I think that's where you're banking on how just being, again, we talk about SEC Player of the Year type guys, like All-American. And it's funny because, like, me and my colleague, Max Barr, like, we jumped on this guy. We saw one of the first games he played a couple years ago. And all of a sudden, like, we just, we're throwing out all kinds of just ridiculous statements about how he's going to be the next Larry Bird and all this other stuff. Like,
that's the best when you see a player and you're like,
yeah,
with a friend and you're just like, look how good this guy is. Oh my God.
And like, of course, at the time, like, no one's even thinking about this guy in that way. And we're just like, man, we love this guy. And then we wound up going to the SEC tournament, and we're just sitting there, and we're like, we love him even more. And then, of course, last year he has like his big breakout. And, too, we were just following it all season. We're like, look at like the analytics and all this other stuff. And I know like some stuff I'm like, all right, I appreciate this level of detail in the analytics. Other stuff I'm just like, all right, I'm just watching this guy and I can tell. But like, you look at just the efficiency numbers and all these things, and I just think we're looking at a guy who is going to be able to do pretty much anything they need him to do. And that's why, like you said, I think it's going to be fascinating because it's not your, the Lee, Flan, Houck combination, let's say at your 1, 2, 3, is not the same as how you played with Clayton, Martin, and Richard. And so I think, like that's going to be kind of a fun combination to see how it plays out. And, knowing too, if you're just looking at it from, a defensive standpoint, I mean, these guys are going to contribute offensively, but it's like, I would love to play 40 minutes. It's probably not going to be possible every game, but if you're telling me I can have Condon and Chinyelu on there for 40 minutes, like, again, good luck to anyone trying to either score on us or be able to stop us when it comes to offensive rebounds, all those things. And so I'm very fascinated to see kind of how they play this lineup. And then, too, it's like, well, again, you aren't really looking at a scenario where I feel like any of those guys, you ever want them to be off the floor, those 3 in particular. And so, not to leave Han Logden off there because, too, it's like, I don't think he's going to play 30 minutes a game or something, but still, what he brings to the table in terms of rebounding and defensive stuff, like, it's just, you have an assortment of talent to work with, and that's where I think it's going to be interesting, like, a freshman in Alex Lloyd or an A.J. Brown or guys like that who factor in, other guard positions. I mean, my goodness, Todd Golden's got plenty of options to work with here.
For sure. Just for context sake, I'm looking at their lineup combinations from last year on cbbanalytics.com. And their top 3 lineups were all featured Martin, Clayton, and Richard, and accounted for 525, 329, 205 possessions. So 1,000 possessions, basically, which is a huge number. And Hawk was in 2 of those lineups and was the 4. in them. And so, this is an adjustment, right? I mean, he can shoot the ball. Like, he shot at 34% last year. He's viable from there, particularly for his size. But he's not Will Richard. He's not Elijah Martin. It's just it's going to be a different deal. So the good news for Florida fans is number one, you just won the national title. So you're in the classic, like, Bill Simmons, you don't get to complain about anything for like 5 years mode. Whatever minor issues you have, you just got to swallow them for a little while. You're still going to be really good. And the coaching staff is smart enough to figure this out. You know what I mean? Like, they'll run different offense if they need to. They'll switch things up.
They are analytics driven. So like they're one of the best in the country. Yeah.
Highly so. And I think, and we talked about this with Kevin Sweeney on a previous podcast, something he and Eric Fawcett had been working on their show. It's called Scout Team, breaking down sort of the trend of going bigger in college basketball. And Florida is at the forefront of that, playing two bigs who are basically centers and just dominate, having a guy who can move at the 4, but isn't necessarily a 3-point threat, but just saying, fine, like, we'll make up for it defensively. We'll make up for it on the offensive glass, and we'll rely on our 3 guys that float around the perimeter instead. And so that is still a viable opportunity here, but it's going to be an interesting sort of mix of guys, and them figuring out their roster is going to be good. And as you mentioned, Xavier Lee has to be really good, and Boogie Flan has to be really good. Those are the 2 star guards there. And they have to hold up their end of the bargain for sure.
Yeah. I'm like, who else would I put at the top? And I tell everybody, I'm like, I know it looks different. It's a different roster in the backcourt, but I just think there's too much there to put them anywhere other than 1 for me going into the season. So
yeah, and you could have replacement level players at the 2 guard spots, and if you had that front court, you'd still be feeling pretty good about it going in. So, okay, well, the next team I have here, and this is the next tier, is the contenders tier, and I mean this in a quasi national title, but mostly SEC title contenders. Which, again, if you're competing for the SEC title, you at least judging on last year's evidence, you got a decent chance. Although I do think the lonely at the top thing for me is a little bit of a broader statement about the conference, and that I think Florida's going to be really good. I think these teams are going to be good to really good, but I'm not sure that we have like a murderer's row of 4 teams in the top 7 in KenPom, at the end of next year or whatever. Like, it's just, I don't know that we have Florida 3, Auburn 4, Tennessee 5, Alabama 6, this crazy league. It might be more like there's 4 or 5 teams in the top 15, top 20, which is still, again, good. You're in good shape. But next in the list, I've got Kentucky. Nice year last year, really promising start to the Mark Pope era. Brought back Otega Owe, who was a big, I think, surprise in a lot of ways. And actually, it was kind of funny. I think it was during the tournament, I was talking to a colleague, and was just like, Oklahoma had Otega Owe and why am I losing this kid's name? The Houston guy, Milos Uzan.
Yes.
Like, on the same roster, and like didn't make the tournament. I was like, if I was an Oklahoma fan, I'd start to be a little bit, I can understand why the chatter was happening. But Owe was awesome last year, but there's just a ton of turnover here, right? Like, it's I think if last year hadn't happened and this was his first, if this was Pope's first year, you'd be a little bit like, it's just a big brand new roster. How's it gonna all fit? But given what he did last year with that team, with so many new guys on the team, and you look at the talent, Jalen Lowe with Pitt, NBA level prospect who, it didn't quite work out at Pitt collectively or individually necessarily last year for him, but that's a really good player. Where are you on Kentucky going into this year, and sort of the Mark Pope, year 2, turning everything over again kind of situation?
Yeah, I feel like this is the kind of team where their strength is just simply going to be numbers. And because, like, right now, I have no idea what, like, rotation I could see. Like, there are so many different ones based on, I think, just the number of guys I think they have that can contribute. For me, I think I'd put Owe right at the top with maybe Houck, possibly Condon. You could probably pick one of those 2 from Florida. SEC preseason player of the year. I'd probably put Jacoby Gillespie in there at Tennessee and so forth. But, like, I think Owe is that good. And like you said, here's a guy last preseason Like, again, me and my colleague Max talked about this. We're like, we barely talked about him. Like, we're like, hey, he's
Oh
going to
yeah.
make a difference, but we barely mentioned the guy very much when we were talking about Kentucky's, best rotations going into the season. And then he just winds up being just an absolute gamer for them. And so I think he's, again, going to be a clear first team All SEC type guy coming into the season. But, beyond that, I think what I would expect Kentucky to be is a little bit different this year in terms of they shot it so well last year. I don't know that if you go up and down, they're going to shoot it as well this year. But I think they're going to be a team that can attack more and get to the free throw line a lot more, which, boy, if you love you some SEC basketball like me and know there's going to be some games where you're shooting 70 free throws, that's a good thing for Kentucky.
Right.
And so I want to see how that plays out. Now, of course, the biggest wild card to me is when is Jaden Quaintance ready to go? And when is he fully healthy? Because if he's the player we know he can be and we've seen him be, and then you're going to take, and it's that question, though, right, of coming back from an injury like this and how essential is he to what they need to do in the front court? Because, Mo Diabate, my goodness, you talk about a guy just kind of that X factor in a lot of games for Alabama at times, like just does the dirty work, isn't a guy that's going to be necessarily that flashy all the time, but he just goes out and does his work. And I think if you're Kentucky, you're expecting a big step forward from Brandon Garrison because all that's going to be required depending on when JQ's back. And so that's where probably if you're trying to pick apart Kentucky a little bit, I think it's what's the rotation look like in the front court? Because I mentioned the two 6'11" freshman guys who I could see them playing, at different points in the season and maybe being potential breakout type guys. I don't have as much concern in the backcourt just because I'm like, I think they're going to figure it out between having an Owe, a Jalen Lowe, a Denzel Aberdeen, national championship experience with Florida, Jasper Johnson, very talented freshman. I mean, even someone like a Colin Chandler who goes into sophomore season, Cam Williams, I think was a really underrated pickup coming in. So I'm like, perimeter play and all that, I think they got enough numbers. I'm just kind of fascinated to see, is their playing style different this year based on the roster, which I think may be a little bit different? And really, what does that front court look like either before or after JQ makes his, return to the court? So,
Yeah. And he is crucial for doing something that Mark Pope, for all of the good teams that he's put together, has typically not done, which is put together really a top tier defensive team.
yep.
You go back to his teams at BYU and last year at Kentucky, beautiful offense, everything flows, people are moving, balls moving. It's super fun to watch. But on the defensive end, it's just never been his strength. And then they've usually been good enough to get by, top 40, top 50. It's not like they're doing the sort of Mike Bray Notre Dame thing of, yeah, we're number 3 in the Fran McCaffrey Iowa thing. Like we're ranked 3rd in offensive efficiency, but like 180th in defense. So it's just a constant, up and down. We take the ball out of the net and we try to go score again. They're not that level, but trying to win a national title at Kentucky, you do kind of have to elevate that a little bit. And I think Owe obviously helps. Aberdeen helps. That's a player I loved last year, and there were multiple times, particularly late in the year, we're just like, man, Aberdeen's good, huh? Geez, like these guys just have like 7, 8 awesome players. And so he's a help. And I think the roster construction, if you want to go portal heavy and you're Kentucky, you have your choice of like top tier high major players. You're not like, I don't want to use this term, but like you're not dumpster diving for like low major guys who popped, but they're playing low level competition and you don't know how they're going to adjust to the level. Like Lowe played in the ACC, Aberdeen is Aberdeen, Diabate was at Alabama. Quaintance is one of the many talented players to come into and then leave Arizona State in the past 3-4 years. So there's a lot of guys here who have a pedigree and who should fit in. It's just constructing a defense, I think, that can keep you afloat if the offense isn't quite as flowy and fluid as maybe it was for Pope last year and as it usually is for him. If you go back to, I think they were 10th last year in offensive efficiency. If you bump back to like 12th or 15th, but your defense comes up to like top 20 level, you're probably a better team in the aggregate than even what they were last year. And they were a really good team last year. So we'll see if he can put that together. All right. Next on the list, we've got Tennessee. We mentioned them. They're your most interesting coaching situation, your wild card with Rick Barnes. The team's good though. The roster's looking good. I'm a big fan of Jacoby Gillespie, big fan of Jacoby Gillespie. And I think he might have a chance to pull a sort of, the past 2 years, Tennessee has featured guards that have come transferred in and been absolutely like, I'm going to take a ton of shots. Coach Barnes told me it's my job to shoot. And that's going to be Gillespie's role again this year, I think.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think Tennessee, of all the teams maybe that have grown on me the most this offseason, I think it's probably them, just because, and I talked to Justin Gainey not long ago, and I thought gave some really good insight into the new guys and what exactly they're seeing from them. And I think that's where you have your knowns in Jacoby Gillespie. Like, he's going to be, like I said, I think probably a top 5 player in the SEC. Wouldn't be shocked at all if he winds up as the player of the year in the SEC. Let's say if Tennessee finishes, somewhere at the top, which I would expect them to. You've got Nate Ament, who I think, again, just by talking to the staff, I know there's always going to be hype around a freshman like this, but like, it seems legit. Like, and that's where we're going to always play the comparison game now with Tennessee. Is he going to be Dalton Knecht? Is he going to be Chaz Lanier? Like, because they've had that dude the past couple years. But I think he'll be different in his own way, and I'm not going to make the Kevin Durant comparisons and all that, which I know have been the sort of the hot thing to do this offseason, but like, dude's going to be really good. And then I look at it and I'm like, if Florida, if one of those Florida guys, maybe not, like, they'd still probably have the best front court, but I'm like, that front court that they have put together in Knoxville of Felix Okpara, who would be a Defensive Player of the Year candidate, I think Jalen Carey, watch him last year at Vanderbilt, you just see this dude can be excellent, I think, and I think they've probably seen a lot so far from him that makes them feel pretty comfortable with what they're gonna do this season. But then it's like you have kind of the underrated guys of Cade Phillips and J.P. Estrella, who have played quality minutes for this team in the front court, and I think that's where, if there's one thing you can bank on with Tennessee, defense. I mean, again, I was looking at Ken Palm the other day. I think it's 6 years in a row they've been a top 5 defensive team, or top 10. I don't remember the number exactly, but
I got it right here for you.
Is it
third,
5, 6?
I'm going from most recent to least. Third, first, third, fifth.
Now,
since 2021. That is ludicrous.
Now, let's consider, though, and this is the point I've made, Kai Ziegler's on all those teams. And
That's
so
true.
That is obviously a big subtraction when it comes to maybe how it looks, but I don't have that level of concern. I just think they're going to defend the way that Rick Barnes' teams defend. And to me, that the key to their season is going to maybe be Amari Abram, who I think is someone who, again, probably not going to get a lot of fanfare coming into the season, but he's going to need to play a big role, I think, probably at that 2 spot. And then it's what are they going to get out of a Bishop Boswell and guys like that, Masamba? Like, what's that rotation look like in the backcourt just beyond Jacoby Gillespie? You know what, though? I've had those same questions with Tennessee before, but it's like if you just have that one rock-solid guy in the backcourt, which they had as Ziegler for so many years, and now you feel like you've gotten with Gillespie, they usually do a pretty good job of figuring it out. And so I think the combination that they have on this roster, one of the more intriguing ones in the entire SEC, in my opinion, just because you've got an experienced star at the top leading your most important position at point guard. You've got, a potential superstar freshman, and then you've just got a lot of dudes in the front court who just go to work. And I think that combination usually has been pretty successful for Rick Barnes.
Yeah, agree. And I think, again, like, maybe you have some Ziegler-related defensive slippage. Okay, fine. Like, he was one of the best perimeter defenders in the country pretty much from the moment he stepped on campus. And he was a huge leader. And, like, again, there's a reason why people thought because he was leaving, there was a chance Rick Barnes might call it a day. Like, this was a guy who Rick Barnes loved as much as any player he's ever coached. And he's had a long coaching career. But there have been lots of really good defenders on those teams throughout. It hasn't all been Zakai Ziegler. And there have been years where, and the last 2 years have not really been the case, but there were years where Tennessee's offense was not as good as they were the past couple of years, and they were still a really, really good team. They were uglier to watch, and they didn't make as many threes, they didn't make as many shots, and there were games they would have that were like 48-44, and they would win, and you'd be like, I need to wash my eyes out with like lie. Like that was a horrendous game of basketball. But a win is a win. And yeah, there's a, with Okpara, there is a sort of, I feel like a defensive floor there where even if they slip a little bit because Ziegler's not around anymore, you're still looking at probably a top 10 defense and probably higher than that. And then you just, you give the ball to Gillespie a bunch. I mean, when I was doing NBA draft stuff over the summer, just kind of writing about like, oh, this is my perspective on these guys that got drafted, particularly the second round guys, because they're kind of the older college basketball guys who the NBA draft is different and weird now because a lot of the guys who would have been in the second round are now sticking around and making like $4 million a year. That was when I realized Chaz Lanier shot 311 threes last year, which is just a ridiculous number. And I didn't even clock it at the time. It wasn't until the summer where I was like, wait, 311? So there's a world in which Gillespie gets that kind of green light, or maybe Nate Amon. Like there's something, they're going to try to get points from their most talented guys. And I don't know that it'll be as much of a grind fest. It might not be as good defensively, but there are options and talent on the offensive end there for them to maybe not go back to the dark days of like, we're 65th on the offensive, efficiency situation, but we're first in defense and you don't really want to watch our games, but we're going to be like a 3 seed. There's probably a little bit more balance on this roster than I think maybe some folks gave it credit for, at least early in the offseason. Okay. Next, Alabama. I think probably Alabama is going to like really try to slow the game down this year. Really sort of lock it down. No, they're going to do what Alabama always does, which is get them down the floor, shoot a ton of threes, space the floor, all the Nate Oates stuff that frankly has kind of changed college basketball in addition to Alabama's program. What do you make of the Tide?
Yeah, I think they'll be the best three-point shooting team in the SEC when you just kind of consider probably the assortment of guards, of course, that they have to work with, which, LeBaron Philon, I think, is also another. I mean, this is one of those years where, like last year.
He's a candidate.
He is. He's an SEC Player of the Year candidate, too. Like, you got a lot of dudes at the top here, and I'm just like, last year was sort of like, all right, pick Broome or pick Sears, and it was one of the two. But, like, this year, I'm like, man, it's kind of wide open in terms of potential guys you could see win this award.
It's a good thing the SEC does like 8 all conference teams, so everyone can get their run this year. This is a year where it will be helpful.
Listen, Garth Glissman told us they were going to settle in on 5 for every team, and I'm going to hold him to that when it comes to just make sure you get your 5-man teams, because I don't ever want to go back to the way it used to be, where some years it was like, oh, we got a tie and there's 11 guys on the first team or something.
This came up in did College Basketball Jeopardy for the website earlier this year, or like a few weeks ago, and there was like an all-conference SEC, section, and it was like this guy was like the 8th person on the second team of all-conference SEC. I was like, wait, this is ridiculous. Like, we got to change this. We got to get to the bottom of this.
I know it is ridiculous. Like, give me 5. That make things easy for me at the end of the season when I'm picking my 5. But I mean, with Alabama, it's like, and I've said too, like they are kind of a team now where, I mean, Jaleel Bethea, I think, was a significant addition for them. I know he's out for probably the first month of the season, and obviously they're going to play a tough schedule just as they do every year, so that could swing a couple games. But we haven't seen a lot of Latrell Wrightsell or Houston Millett the past couple seasons, and I'm like, I think they're going to probably be huge factors on this team, knowing that Philon and Aiden Holloway are, probably in pretty good spots to lead the way. I think adding Bowen from Florida State was another one where I'm just like, if I look at Alabama's front court, I think there are some questions you have about their front court, because they need Aiden Sherrill to take a big step forward as a sophomore. You've got some younger guys in the front court, but I think with Bowen, he's got the kind of upside where he can dominate games potentially, I think, in this league, just the way he plays. And so I feel like Alabama's one of those that, like, this roster can look however you want. Like, you're going to put them up there just because of the track record of Nate Oates and what he's been able to achieve. But, it's still going to be a guards game here. And I think it's one of those where, like I said, they'll be the best shooting team, I think, in the league, and score a ton of points. And they should probably, in my opinion, finish no worse than 4th or 5th in the league. So.
Yeah, the front court questions for sure. But, you look at the way some of the rosters in the league have been remade in the summer, sometimes by choice, sometimes not. And you look at the retention in the backcourt, and I think it's a huge bonus because you don't have Mark Sears, but Philon, again, absolutely SEC Player of the Year candidate shortlist, like right up among the top contenders. Holloway, I think somewhat quietly maybe had a really awesome year last year after struggling at Auburn in his first season and kind of okay coming over, but like he was great last year. And Wrightsell back obviously. Yeah. But like, again, it's Alabama. It's Nate Oates. You know what they're going to do. They're going to get up and down. They're going to shoot a ton of threes. They're going to space the floor. If their front court can do that in the way that they normally do, where they're sort of four out, one in, and can space it like to the corner the way they normally do, then they're going to do what Alabama kind of always does these days. And again, it's the type of thing where kind of like Rick Barnes coaching a defense systemically, you could have way worse players than this and still be like, yeah, they'll be tough though. They'll be tough to guard, like just because they make it so hard. They play really good stuff. It's just hard to guard. And you could Nate Oates could be back at Buffalo, or he could be in the Summit League, or he could be wherever and have less talented players than this. And you would think that they are going to maximize and optimize every sort of little analytical piece that they can get and perform sort of what you're talking about, where they lost a lot. Mark Sears was awesome, but they're still going to be really good. Okay. Next team's Arkansas, still in this tier of conference contenders, and felt a little burned by Arkansas entering the season last year in November and December. Again, was really not happy early in the year with the usage of John L. Davis, who turned it around late in the year and got awesome again. It took Calipari longer than expected to put the roster together. Once they did, they were pretty formidable. Now you're hoping in year two, things coalesce a little bit more quickly.
Yeah, you're talking about being burned. Like for some reason, it must just be like contractual. I think I have put Arkansas at 2 in my preseason rankings for like 2 or 3 straight years now, and I don't know why.
In the country?
No, just in my SEC rankings. But still, it's like we get 5 or 6 games in SEC play, and I'm looking up like, 0-5, 1-6. Like, what is going on? Like, how has this happened? So I will probably not do that this year. I probably won't put them at 2. Of course, I'll probably put them no worse than like 3 or something. But I've been sold on Arkansas, but it hasn't been there in terms of the SEC success. Like, I was looking that up earlier. Like, even of course the teams that made runs in the tournament, like some of those teams still struggled during the season. And so I think with this group, I think, like, I'm not confident, but man, surely when you look at the 5-6 players they have to work with, like from 6'3" to 6'6", they've got to be able to be a very consistent offensive team. And of course, that's been the knock on Cal is, yes, you can look at the analytical numbers and be like, well, look how great, some of the offensive teams were at Kentucky at times and all those things. But like, it's just the way I think the flow of their offense. And I think it's just evolving to meet kind of the players you have on the roster. And to me, there's no perfect example of this team right here, because you have 2 stud freshmen and Darius Acuff and Malik Thomas, who are coming in. They're going to have the ball in their hands a lot. But then it's like you've got DJ Wagner, he's a Cal guy. Like, he came in last year, and it's like Cal's like, I'm bringing you over. I need you on the court at all times. And I don't remember what he finished in terms of minutes played in the SEC. I think he's 1 or 2, 3 maybe.
He will play every available minute.
Yes, and that's where it gets interesting, because how are you going to do that this year? And I think that's what's going to be interesting to me, because you are probably looking at a situation where it's like, all right, Acuff, Thomas, Wagner. But then I'm thinking, I look at Carter Knox. I mean, he is another one that, like, I would put him on the short list of SEC Player of the Year guys. You look at the way this guy played towards the end of last season, and just I think you could see the individual development he made. And he's another one who decided to come back to school when it seemed like it was maybe 50-50 there for a little while. I think Carter Knox is going to be outstanding this season on this team, knowing that I think you do have kind of those superstar freshman guards who are going to take some of that pressure off of him too. But then, like, Billy Richmond, like, he was kind of an invaluable part of the puzzle last year. And so those 5 guys in particular, I think are just, I don't know what the minutes distribution looks like, but I'm really interested to find out because with the front court, you've got two of the more experienced SEC players, period, not just in the front court, in Trevin Brazile and Nick Pringle, who are both there. And then it's like you add a Malik Ewan, who I think, again, is going to be a great fit for probably how they want to play. And so I'm talking Arkansas up, and I'm going to keep talking them up. Like, I want to see it, though, because, the talent's been there for however many years in a row. I know we're talking multiple coaching staffs, but yeah, I think this is the kind of team where it's like if you want to see some of that vintage Cal, I'm not saying, there's a Karl Anthony Towns and all that, Anthony Davis or anything, but hey, in terms of the guard play, man, this is one of the best groups he's had in a while, I think, just in terms of pure skill, even if, there is obviously 4 of those 5 are underclassmen. So,
yeah, no, look, I mean, he has a long and storied track record of getting freshmen really good really quickly. Yep. I think, I think for me, the big thing with Cal, and I think this is what Kentucky fans had a problem with in the latter years, was it's not just getting good guys, it's how you deploy them, right? Mm-hmm. And again, last year they pulled it together, and there are ways to win. You don't have to play like Alabama. You don't have to do this hyper optimized, super modern basketball. Like if you have guys who can make mid-range shots, get them to the elbow and let them make mid-range shots. It's fine. You know what I mean? Like it's okay. But they were regressive, sort of actively regressive in their offensive style last year, and that hurt them, even though they had, for most of the year, a guy like John L. Davis was just like, can you get some space for this guy? Can you get him off some?
It's one guy and it's just 4 guys standing. And like, I can't tell you how many times we just circled last year. And I know that's like, okay, if you watch the NBA or something, sometimes you're watching a game 27 or something. And like, all right, there's LeBron with the ball and there's just 4 guys standing. I get it. But like, they just, like you said, I think deploying is the right word because they just don't, I feel like at times put their guys in the best position to succeed offensively when it's just like, let's just see what happens rather than running stuff to make sure it happens. So,
right. It's like, okay, John L., run off 3 baseline screens and we're going to get you a guarded corner 3, like, 30 times this season or whatever. It's just like, you got to get the ball moving, DJ Wagner cannot stand at the top of the key, dribbling for 15 seconds, kind of trying to slowly make his way around a screen that the defense is going under because he can't shoot. And like, you just have to reconcile yourself to the fact that like DJ Wagner's going to play. Cal is not going to betray him and stick him on the bench because he's got talented guys. Now, maybe he'll play a little bit less. I'll believe that when I see it. Right. But it's possible that there comes a point where it's just like, look, hey buddy, like these guys are real good. You're still going to play. You're going to play 60% of the minutes instead of what was it last year? 85.9% of the minutes. Yeah. You know what I mean? But yeah, look, again, with Calipari, particularly in these last 5, 6, 7 years, it's been, look, there's always going to be talent on these rosters. And if he will gradually put it together, like you saw at Arkansas last year, again, I totally dismissed them early in the year. Like this team is, outdated and misused, and this is a bad coaching job, and he's doing a bad job. And then you get to the middle of SEC play, you're like, oh, they're right in there in every game, even the games they lose, and they're playing pretty well these days. In fact, they were like a really good team to bet on for a while because everyone wrote them off, and they were like a 3 or 4 week spell there where they were, if you bet on Arkansas, they were either winning or covering. But they are again in that same conundrum of, can you open it up a little bit more? Can you make this a little bit more optimized? Can you, I'm looking at their shooting splits on CBB Analytics right now. I mean, they took 32% of their shots from 3, which is, pretty low. They didn't get a ton of shots at the rim. They were 70th percentile in the country in mid-range 2s. Most of their 3s were not in good spots. I mean, it's just a bit of a messy, sort of outdated offense. And that's the big step. Again, you don't have to play like Alabama. You don't have to hyper optimize it, but you do have to put guys in maybe slightly better positions to succeed, and maybe just drag back a little bit on the DJ Wagner minutes, just a little bit. We'll see. We'll see if he does it. All right. Tournament plans, Vandy. Mark Byington, he is the Kurt Signetti of college basketball.
There you go.
Goes from
That's a good
JMU to a conference's historic, underachiever without as many resources, and suddenly turns them around in year one with a bunch of transfers. This is a really interesting year, but I think people are, caught on. Like, I think there were people last year who saw Vanderbilt potentially coming, but maybe, oh yeah, they'll be interesting. Like, they'll be scrappy. They're not going to be a total like pushover in conference play. And then they went to the tournament. So, lost some guys, some really good players, and have refreshed, and I think are still in a pretty good position to be back in the tournament this year.
Yeah, they're probably my favorite team this offseason in terms of just where I initially looked at them and said, all right, they're going to lose some key guys, to what they've done with the roster. I think, like, pretty much, when we've done kind of our rankings debate and all that, I've had a hard time putting them lower than like maybe 8th, maybe 7th, because I think there is a chance that they're that good. And that's where too, like, it's the belief in Mark Byington's system. I think I've got the coaching clinic notes of one SEC head coach on my computer right now, and it's Mark Byington's, because I look over it and I see the way, like, all these different fundamental things of the transition and the spacing and all this stuff, and I'm like, I love it. Like, it is fantastic to actually watch, and that was a big contrast from the previous couple regimes they had there. Did not have the success. Like, they're back to playing Vanderbilt basketball. And I think, again, I was talking earlier, like back in the Kevin Stallings era and going back further than that. And yes, like, I know how some of those ended, but they were a team that was able to, and now it's changed because of NIL and transfers, but even then, transfers and Vanderbilt don't always go hand to hand when it comes to the difficulty that can be at times. But
well, it's tough with academic schools.
Yeah.
Like, it can be a detriment. It can also be a plus, because, like schools like Stanford, like Kyle Smith, he really wants to try and keep guys. And the sell is, look, man, you're going to get a Stanford degree. There's also not a lot of other places who, you can go somewhere, but you're not going to get as high quality of an education. Vanderbilt has that sell, but it can be a detriment when you're trying to pull guys out of the portal too.
Yeah, and I think, like, it's that combination of being able to just work the things that I think can be very successful at Vanderbilt. And, like, I'm not saying it's the exact same, but, like, it kind of is what Clark Lee's doing right now with Vanderbilt football, where it's like, I mean, this is a team that, has been one of the more talked about teams in football, and they've just been able to lean a little bit more into, I think, what you need to be successful there. And now I think when you look at the roster he's built, man, I mean, this guard perimeter group here, like, yes, it looks like it's just kind of a mix of a lot of different guys, but I think these are all guys who can contribute at a really high level in the SEC. And, Tyler Nickel, to me, is one of my favorite players going into the season, because, like, I could see this guy. We talk about 3-point attempts. I mean, if I'm Vanderbilt, I give him 15 a game. Like, and you've got the guards, who can open up the opportunities for him to get that, because I think he can be one of the top scorers in the entire conference this year. And so, you've got a gritty guy coming in Duke Miles. You've got Tyler Tanner, who I think was one of the more underrated freshmen in the SEC last year. He had that ridiculous streak where he didn't turn the ball over. Like, I don't even remember what the number was, but it was just absurd for a freshman in the SEC going against these kind of, athletic, kind of big guards that you see in this league. And this guy didn't turn the ball over for however long it was. Adding, again, some experience in a guy like Frankie Collins. What's Mike James going to be? That's intriguing. Tyler Harris comes in, and then you go to the front court. Devin McLaughlin, talk about analytics, like, the analytics loved this guy last year. And I think it's like, okay, he's someone. And the front court's very experienced with the guys they brought in. Jalen Washington, I think, is another one, kind of fascinating to see what his role is on this team. And you just keep going down the list. Like, they are a very, I think, deep team. I can see them, like, maybe by the end of the season they're not playing 10 guys, but, like, I think they got at least 10 guys who feel like they are pretty productive in terms of what they're going to do in the system. So I may swing and miss on this one. Like, last year, we backed off Vanderbilt. We were all on them as the sleeper, and then by the time we got the season, like, I'm backing off. It's like the reverse this year. We're like, I'm all in on this team. I think they're going to be really good, and it wouldn't surprise me at all. If we want to, pick a team that cracks the top 5 out of this group, I think Vanderbilt's got an awesome opportunity to do that.
Yeah, I think the way I'd say it is, there are some programs in the country and some coaches where you look at their roster and you think, Look, I don't know if I see it, but this coach always figures it out. We've had coaches like that. I think Tony Bennett at Virginia was a classic example. Sometimes you look at his rosters after losing guys like Malcolm Brogdon or whatever and be like, I just don't see the talent here. And then London Parentis is like the ACC player of the year or whatever. Mark Byington has somehow gotten there after year one and with a bunch of new guys on the roster. It's really impressive. And I think, again, the fact that you can lose a guy like Jason Edwards, who took a ton of shots, was a super high usage player. He's going to Providence and is a big reason why Providence fans are excited about their backcourt this year. And it's just like, no, yeah, Vanderbilt will still be good. They might even be better. And it's just like, okay, like that's the level of faith here. And you're right. In terms of depth, there are a ton of guys who have played a ton of minutes for various schools. I mean, Mike James, 2 years ago with Louisville, played 33 minutes a game.
Yeah.
Granted, that was for a very bad team with a very bad coach. All due respect to Kenny Payne, but it didn't go well. You got guys who up and down the roster, whether it's Mason Nicholson at Jacksonville State or George Kimball at Eastern Kentucky, these guys have played a lot of minutes in college basketball. And so there's a level of ability to come in and play. You're not looking at too many guys who are like, oh yeah, they played, some spot minutes, but they've got a good skill set, whatever. There's a lot of interesting guys here. And that fits with Byington because he'll play some weird lineups and he'll do some weird stuff. And it'll probably be successful. Okay. Next on my list, might not be next on everybody's list, but next on my list is Mizzou. I think, with the exception of that 0-18 season, which was kind of a bummer and involved a fair amount of bad luck. They weren't a good team, but 0-18 was a little harsh on them that year.
Yeah.
Dennis Gates has generally been a rousing success at Mizzou. And the thing I always say about Dennis Gates is I was at the Final Four one year doing a radio hit on the St. Louis radio station with Bernie Miklas, who's a very nice man and does St. Louis radio. And we were talking about the Final Four, and Dennis Gates had just gotten hired. It was my bad for not preparing, but he, like, at the end of the interview, he's like, oh yeah, Dennis Gates at Mizzou just got hired. Do you have anything to say about him? And I was like, he's for Cleveland State, right? And he was like, yeah. I was like, I'm honestly not super familiar with his teams. I'll have to get back to you on that one. And it was like an awkward live radio moment. I think everyone's much more familiar now, but coming from, a couple of decent years at Cleveland State, but nothing fancy. And a lot of people, I think, questioning the hire at the time, once you kind of dug into it, he's been spectacular. And this looks like it's going to be another solid season.
Yeah. So again, if there's any Missouri fans watching this, that I feel like I've been connected with Dennis Gates, maybe more than any media person since he got the job, because I was so all in on this guy, and I had so many people telling me this was just a complete disaster of a hire. And I brought up
there was a lot of negativity around it. That's for sure.
A ton of it. And I just brought up my examples. So when I was writing for the Blue Ribbon College Basketball Yearbook, Missouri was one of the teams that I wrote the profile on every offseason. And so I also, though, wrote the Horizon League teams. And so, like, I was looking at this and saying, okay, I'm going to go back to what I've learned from him at Cleveland State. And I continue to say this to this day. I've never, in probably a 20-minute conversation, been more impressed by a single coach than Dennis Gates. And I think it's a guy who you feel like has that leadership, has that it factor. And then, of course, the first season happens, and everybody's like, well, Blake, you're a genius. I'm like, well, I don't really be looked at as a genius. I appreciate it. But, like, it's just, I think, what this guy is. Like, he's a winner. And then, of course, what happens? They followed up with Ofer. And that's where, I'm over there doing the same thing. I'm trying to sort of be like, hey, if you look at the data, they lost 10 or 11 games, I think, by like 8 points or 7 points or less, and a lot of injuries.
Oh, it was very harsh.
It was terrible.
Teams ranked
right?
145th in KenPom,
exactly.
are not good, but they're not 0-18 in the SEC.
No, and that's what, like, I was going through and comparing it to, like, hey, I can find you 15 other SEC teams that won 5 games that were not as good as that Ofer Missouri team in the past decade.
You were running the numbers on it.
Yeah, like, it's wild. And so it's just kind of one of those things where, like, I do, and I know it's not easy for Missouri fans because you have that season. Again, even if they win 2 games, we're not looking at it the same way. It's so much easier to say they didn't win a game. But he has, I think, put the formula in place that you need, again, to be successful at Missouri. And when you kind of, take it to this roster, here we go again. Like Mark Mitchell, if Missouri's great this season, he's an SEC Player of the Year type candidate, like no question. And Robinson, another analytics darling at times last year when it came to just the I think the production that he had when he was on the court. Now it dropped off a little bit at times, but I still think he's a guy that you're looking at and feeling like, all right, he's leading the way. Mark Mitchell, that's a great start. But then I think you've got like these breakout candidates. And this is where, like, I don't want to say it's a guarantee, but I think you've got a lot of breakout candidates you feel pretty confident in. T.O. Barrett, I think getting a lot of sort of maybe overlooked in terms of what he could contribute, I think, at the guard position. Jacob Cruz, a guy who can give them three-point shooting, kind of can be kind of that energy guy. We saw him play that role last year. And then it's like, all right, what are you getting from a Sebastian Mack? What are you getting from a Sean Phillips? Like, these are some guys who have played, again, valuable minutes. And then you're looking for breakouts from a Trent Pierce and all that. And so, I mean, to me, it's like this isn't that different than what Dennis Gates roster-wise has tried to build since he's been there. Also following some of like the Leonard Hamilton, ways of how tall can my roster be. I mean, he's always got just a bunch of just huge dudes there. And to me, the only question I have with Missouri is Caleb Grill had an insane season, and he got them out of jams a lot. Like,
Yeah.
do they have one of those on this roster? Are they going to need a guy like that on this roster? Like, Mark Mitchell can be that guy, but they're different players. I want to see the shooting with this team, and I think that's where, if you looked at that early success, they did two things really well. They shot the ball really well, and they forced a lot of turnovers. I think they'll force a lot of turnovers, but I still have some questions as to, what's it going to look like in terms of their shooting percentages this year.
Yeah, those are valid questions. I think Grill was, like you said, kind of a get out of jail free card for them multiple times last year. But Robinson is spectacular on both sides of the ball. And you see some of the same transfer strategy that we've seen have success for Dennis Gates, which is guys from pedigree programs, or at least high major programs, talented guys that for whatever reason it didn't work out, or they're maybe a little bit surplus to requirements at their previous school. Mark Mitchell being a great example. It's like, you're a really good player, but you're going to get recruited over the top of. It's either going to happen this year or next year. Why don't you come over here and be a star? Sebastian Mack, touted recruit, solid couple of seasons at UCLA, didn't quite hit the level. Maybe your chance is in a bit of a change of scenery type of situation. And some good continuity here too. Those guys are kind of peppered in. You got Sean Phillips from Arizona State peppered in, but there's not it's not a rash of new guys. It's a fairly good balance in terms of keeping guys around, developing them, Robinson being chief among them, and Mitchell as well, but also, peppering in new players that can give you a little bit of what you're missing. I think, this, the 0-18 year, again, was very unlucky, but you could totally understand if Mizzou fans were like, oh God, like, he had a good year with a lot of the previous coaches' players, and it's now we're getting into the real, what this is really going to be like. And the bounce back last year, I think, was massive. And I think we're kind of in line, we've been surprised before, but I think we're kind of in line for a similar type of season, even if they're not like a top 20, top 15 team. I think another tournament bid is very within reason here. So, again, if you're Mizzou and you went through the Kim Anderson era, then you're probably pretty happy with where things are right now, even if as we said, the hire didn't go well and my radio hit didn't go well from the jump. Okay. We talked a little bit about this, but didn't talk about the players so much besides Pettiford. Auburn is the next one on my list. Probably was, as you said, probably was going to be a bit of a step back year for Auburn. You lose Janai Broom and you don't have an obvious replacement because there really is no replacement for Janai Broom. You're probably not going to be as good as you were when you were one of the best teams in the last 10 years of college basketball or whatever. But Pettiford, I think, gives them a chance, at the very least, a chance to be super fun to watch, because he's very fun to watch.
Yeah, I think so too. And like we said, add him to the list of Player of the Year candidates. I mean, Keyshawn Hall, the two Keyshawns, and I know they're spelled differently. I think they're said differently. Keyshawn Hall and then Keshawn Murphy. Those are
that's
going
to be fun for me to remember all year.
I know, right? Like, and I'm already trying to make sure I get these right because I've said them a lot this offseason because I'm going to wind up mixing them up somehow. But
It took me like 10 years to figure out how to spell Coach K's name reliably without spell check.
well,
So
I still can't do it. There's no chance I could do that. If you ask me to on the fly right now, there's not a shot. But yeah, I mean, I think those two guys are really the key to their success this year. I mean, Pettiford's the obvious one, but I think it comes down to those two. Obviously, Murphy comes over from Mississippi State. Again, one of the more, I mentioned Nick Pringle and how many games he's played in the SEC. Like Murphy, I think he's a beast, and I feel like he's kind of what they need defensively for sure on this team, losing, again, everything they lost from last season. And then Hall, I mean, I think he's a guy too. Like, don't be surprised. All the attention's going to be on Pettiford. I think Hall's the one that's going to benefit the most from this because he's going to put up a lot of points on this team. I think he has to for Auburn to be successful. So I kind of look at them as the big three of this group, and that's not to, discount what some of these other guys could be, whether it's Overton or, Freeman or Jovic or all of these different guys. But, like, different. I'm just going to keep using that word. Like, it's just a different setup than they had last year. And when you add in the coaching change, I just think it's something where it's just, I'm going to play wait and see with Auburn. Not because I don't think they can do it, just because, I mean, they are easily the most interesting team in the first month of the season just because their schedule is brutal and it's a new coach. What's it look like with 2 minutes to go and you're down 4? Like, all those kind of things. Like, how do you make different adjustments and all that? Like, what rotations do you have on the floor? Like, those are the things that I just don't have a great feel for with Auburn in this new look roster. But I also am willing to admit, like, hey, if it does come together, sure. Like, I don't think they're going to be outside the top 5. If they can get the production from kind of their main top core of guys, and when they're running those first 3 that I mentioned, I mean, you'll feel pretty good about that up against, a big 3 from a lot of other teams in the SEC.
yeah, and Overton's an interesting player, actually.
Yep.
Just really good at Drake, right? And then good at Texas Tech, but in a role because they had so many good offensive players that he was not going to be a star of that team, right?
Yep.
If you're playing in a similar position to Darian Williams, sorry, bud, but you're not going to be on the floor nearly as much as he is. Like, it's just not how it's going to work. But you can totally imagine him in the context of Auburn's offense being a really useful sort of second guy to have next to Pettiford, particularly playing away from the ball, spacing the floor a little bit, trying to give Pettiford, who, again, I think, it'll shake out. However it shakes out, it's going to be interesting. It could shake out that Pettiford is doing like a 30% usage rate type of season in the SEC, which is a lot to ask of anyone. But he's an electric talent.
Yeah.
Like, he is really potentially that good. As long as he's getting downhill, getting at the rim, and Auburn's running the stuff that they were running last year when he had the ball in his hands. But you don't have the just world devouring, throw it down to Janai and let him get you 2 more points and go from there. So yeah, it's a totally different deal. I think one thing you can probably rely on is the way they're going to play defense. And again, Stephen Pearl has been their defensive coordinator for a while now. Bruce Pearl always had defenses like this, and they ramped it up in the past few years of just, they're going to be athletic, they're going to be long, and they are going to press and pressure. They may not full court press all the time the way Pearl's early teams did, at Milwaukee and Tennessee, but they will get after you, 40 feet from the rim and make everything difficult and make inbounds plays extremely difficult. So they should still have some of those fundamentals of the program, even if you look at the roster and you're a little like, well,
yeah,
it's not quite, obviously it's not what it was last year. It's maybe not quite what it has been in previous seasons. They still have a chance to be a tournament team if they're not quite, going to be at the level. So my next team, I have them maybe a little bit higher than some of the previews that I've seen, is Ole Miss. And this is purely I think Chris Beard's really good at his job type of play here. I think they probably overachieved their talent a little bit last year as well. And I'm kind of penciling them in to do the same again this year, even if there's, I'm sure, concerns people could raise about the actual level of the talent there.
Yeah, and he's one of the coaches we spoke to not long ago on our basketball stuff, and it was kind of, you want to talk about a coach just being like, hey, I'm just going to flat out tell you what I think of this guy. And he's not held back on what he thinks of where Malik Dia can be versus where he's at right now. And I mean, that to me is like, that's the story of their season right there. Is Dia the kind of guy who clearly he has challenged any way possible he can to get this guy to being, where he's doing 18 and 15 night in and night out. I think he, probably needs him to do that this season. I'm obviously 18 and 15 may be an extreme, but like he's got to probably be on that list of SEC Player of the Year type candidates. Not saying you're going to rank him maybe above 4 or 5 of the other guys we mentioned, but he's got to be in a first team All SEC discussion. I think if Ole Miss is going to have a great season, but I think they're clearly a tournament team. I think that's where, like you said, it's the Chris Beard effect and just knowing kind of what the expectations are going to be for them. He's got a lot of, I think, interesting guys here that he's bringing in that I feel like fit how he wants to play, whether it's, having a James Scott alongside a Malik Dia in the front court, like Corey Chest. I thought he was one of the more undervalued SEC players last year as a freshman when he was at LSU. And I think talking to that staff, like they're just like, hey, the more experience he gets, the more impactful he's going to be for us. And so I think that's where, pivotal, that kind of that first month of the season, first couple months before you get into SEC play will be crucial for someone like him. But then it's like, you're looking at AJ Storr, you're looking at Corin Johnson, Elias Cameradine, like he's one of those fascinating ones where it's like you got a guy coming in and you feel like he should make a pretty big impact as a guy who's coming in from overseas. And then it's like, hey, Travis Perry, like he's someone that I think, you want to talk about just gushing over a player. Like Beard was like, man, Travis Perry, like this guy, again, so seeing what he did at Kentucky last year. So I think they've got a lot of good numbers here. And Eduardo Klafke, he probably didn't get enough love for what he did last season. So like me just mentioning all those names off the top, like I think that shows you like they've got the potential to be a very deep team. And I think overall, like you just expect them to win games, and I think they will. Do they have the same upside as some of these other teams we mentioned? Maybe not, but like I also don't look at them as a team where I feel like they're going to finish much lower than kind of in this group of teams, just because, hey, it's Chris Beard, and I think he will figure it out given the numbers that he has on this roster.
Yeah. So I'm going to give you my most interesting player in the SEC this year, and it's AJ Storr. Mm-hmm. And look, the track record is what the track record is. The guy's played for a different school every year, both high school and college, since 2018.
Just hearing you say that, it's just like, I know it, but just when you hear it out loud,
it's remarkable. It really is. And not in a good way, right? Like I'm very pro transfer portal. I'm very pro NIL. I'm very pro, like, go do what you think is best for your career. When that extends back into high school and you've played for 4 different high schools in 4 seasons, and now you've played for 4 different colleges in 4 seasons, that's when it's time to start asking some questions about your ability to commit to a team and a project. But I think anyone who has ever been 21, 22 can identify with the idea of, and he might be 23. I don't even know. However old he is, he's now in that position. And I haven't talked to him, haven't talked to his family. I'm just doing a little armchair psychoanalysis here. If you've been to college and you feel the start of your senior year happening, you feel the panic of, oh my God, this isn't a joke anymore. I got to figure this out. I got to figure out what I'm going to do with my job. I got to make sure my GPA is good. I got to figure out how to, live a life that doesn't involve just walking to campus every time. I got to figure out where I'm going to live. What is my life going to look like? And I just think there's a decent chance that like Chris Beard gets into him this year a little bit about like how many, you had a good year at Wisconsin. Congratulations. Didn't go well for you at Kansas. Do you want to be like a pro? Do you want to make money playing basketball for the rest of your life? This is your chance. And he will need him to be AJ Storr of Wisconsin and maybe slightly more efficient, but he had a really good year at Wisconsin. It's why he went to Kansas the following year. And I think, if you take the history of moving schools every year out of the equation, there was a very good argument for why Bill Self would want to take him. Again, it didn't work out, and that team didn't seem to get along very well. And there were a bunch of other issues with the roster construction and how everything played out there. But I do think there's a long history in Chris Beard's career of taking kids who are sort of going all the way back to Little Rock and his time in the CBA, of like last chance saloon type of guys, And that's kind of what AJ Storr has become, even though he still remains a very talented college basketball player.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think like that combination of what does he get at the end of the season out of Malik D and AJ Storr, like that's probably telling us Ole Miss's entire year right there. If he gets the best out of both of those guys, they're a surefire tournament team that's probably flirting with, a top 6, 7 finish in the SEC, and that probably means you're a 5 seed, something like that, maybe 6 seed, somewhere in there. So,
right, yeah, okay. Well, we'll see how it plays out. I mean, there are a lot of questions there. I feel like I'm taking a little bit of a long shot bet on.
Yeah,
it's pretty unusual for Beard to have teams that are not. I see them like in SEC preview sometimes like 13th, 14th, and I'm just like, no. It's been a long time since Chris Beard had a team at that level in any league he's been in. No. Okay. Next one I've got on this list, which again, we're still in the tournament plans tier. And we've got a couple more in here and then we'll wrap it up. We've got Texas. New coach, new management. Rodney Terry had a nice little run. It didn't ultimately work out, although I think he did a nice job in a very difficult situation, speaking of Chris Beard, when he took over the job, and was probably always in a position where, unless he won like crazy, they were going to look to make a change. They did. Sean Miller is here. He's back at a super high major, tons of resources program the way he was at Arizona. And so I'm interested to see what you think of this. This roster's fine. I don't think it's like amazing. I'm kind of interested to see what he does down the line, but I guess I was expecting maybe a little bit more hit the ground running kind of talent here, but there's still some good players here.
Yeah, I think that's it. Like they feel like a good team. I don't know that, again, I would put them anywhere maybe on that same level as the teams that feel like they can be elite, like at the top. But I think that there are some pieces on this roster where it's like, hey, I mean, there are some ones like a Lassina Traore. Like a lot of people aren't going to know that this guy, was at Long Beach State. He was there for the final, hurrah when Dan Munson and all that. But like, he can play. And now that he's cleared, ready to come back, like I think he's going to be just the physical assets alone, I think, are perfect for the SEC. And when you're kind of pairing him with, obviously, Vokatitis is in there, you got Dalen Swain. That front court to me is probably like, we talk about like most interesting picks or something. We have our ones that I feel really confident. I think this is an interesting group to see how this plays out. And so that's probably going to determine a lot with Texas for me, because when I look at the potential guard rotation they've got, I feel really good about where they're at, because Tremont Mark, another guy who's played a lot of SEC games now, and even before that, I mean, he's playing valuable games at Houston. I mean, Pope, Weaver, like those guys were essential to their success last year. I think to get both of them back was huge for Sean Miller, because I don't know what it looks like without him. And so I think those two are really kind of potential unsung heroes. Just the fact that they're on this roster is huge. And then, of course, Wilcher comes in. Like I don't know if I see the depth that I see with a lot of these other teams, but you don't always need depth. I mean, it's kind of one of those where like, hey, if you just go through a season, you don't have bad luck with injuries and all that, you don't have to have 12 guys that you're like, okay, they can all 12 play. Maybe they do. I think most season,
most coaches would prefer like 7. If you gave them a world where nobody ever got hurt, they'd be good with that.
And I think that's where, if his top 7 on this, if they all pan out, which again, there's no guarantee it will, I think they're going to be fine. And I think they have a chance to win a lot of games, probably, maybe double-digit wins in the SEC, which, I mean, you can kind of bank on at least an 8-10 team getting in every single year, and especially last year, there were multiples of those. And so I think they have that potential upside. It's just you're asking, for all these pieces to come together, and I think especially for me, it's the front court of what kind of production they get there, and, how does this team compare to some of those Sean Miller teams, not just Xavier, but Arizona and so forth, in terms of like playing style and what they're going to be good at. Like what are those kind of identifiable things that set them apart from some of these other teams? I don't have a great read just yet with this Texas team.
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, again, with all due respect to Terry, who I think did a good job in a tough situation, the ball is going to move a lot more under Sean Miller. It just is. His offense is going to be much more fun to watch. It's going to involve a lot less ISO stuff. And it will be more effective just from a systemic standpoint. And I don't know that the talent is here. I do think it was good, honestly, in a low key way to keep Weaver, because I think he's just a good, like, fun energy defense guy to have in your program when you're starting from scratch, basically. Obviously there's some guys coming back here. It's not a total tear down the way a lot of new coaching, turnover transitions are. But Weaver is like a good energy defense guy, particularly on a Sean Miller team, which, they had some issues with defense here and there at Xavier, although it's easy to forget. They were a 3 seed in his first year at Xavier.
Yeah.
And they barely made the tourney last year, but they had good players, and there were some, maybe that roster underachieved a little bit, but they had some bad injury luck along the way. It's going to be fascinating to see, because it's a guy who had Arizona sort of in the top tier of college basketball for most of his time there, and he's now back at a program with resources that, are essentially limitless in theory. And so it'll be fascinating to see how he builds it. But, it may be sort of a nice solid first year. And then you look at this roster this time next year and it's like, oh, okay, now things are getting rolling. Speaking of, well, not really speaking of, but just Texas's rival, Oklahoma, is next on my list. Big kind of sort of breakthrough for Porter Moser last year, in that he got into the tournament, as you talked about at the top of the show, which is like an hour and a half ago. He there were rumbles, and they were kind of in a weird purgatory where every year they're in like between the 30s and the 50s in KenPom, and kind of in the tournament mix, and then don't win enough games in the league, or just don't win enough games overall, the non-conference, whatever. Started out really well in the non-conference last year, had to slog it. I think, honestly, having so much riding on Jeremiah Fears last year, pardon me, who's a super talented guy, but like asking him to take as much of the ball and as many shots as he did against this SEC, the 2025 SEC last year, he was going to hit a wall at some point. And he did. I think he came through it and played well down the stretch, but there were moments in the middle of the year there where you're like, you got to diversify here. This kid is he's getting crushed on these screens, man. You're going to end this kid's career early. But they got in the tournament. They lost to UConn, and the questions maybe subsided a little bit, but I think there are still people who, like, there are going to be people in any fan base who, if you finally make the tournament after 4 years and you lose one game as a 9 seed or whatever, they're still going to want to see a little bit more.
And that's the thing, is like, I don't know that I necessarily see this team, at least on paper, like it happens every year. I mean, we had the example of South Carolina a couple of years ago where I was as confident as I've ever been on the team being the worst in the SEC, and then they're in the SEC title race in the final regular season week, but I don't know. Like, I kind of look at this in that same example where it's like, hey, would I be shocked if they're in the 8-9 game and then lose to the one in the second round? No. I think that's probably kind of your initial expectation. But I still think it goes back to, even for Oklahoma, it's like, what is the goal for Oklahoma, like basketball-wise? Like, are they as kind of, if we talk about in terms of putting in resources and all those things, like where would they rank right now? Where does that job rank, among the ones in the SEC, this new look SEC? So I think it's kind of going to be interesting to see, because when I look at the roster, I'm like, all right, Nigel Pack, obviously a lot of experience. I think Xavier Brown's going to be really good for him. Darian Reed, I mean, if he's, I know, and we talked about earlier, it's like when a guy transfers, the fan base all of a sudden just turns and says, well, this guy isn't any good. But, like, I'm not saying Darian Reed was, one of the best freshmen in the country at Alabama or anything, but, like, you can see the potential there of, like, this guy becoming, I think, one of the top sophomores in the SEC. And so I think it's possibly there, although you can tell, like, I'm just not, this is one of those rosters that I just don't have a great feel for right now, because I could see this going a variety of ways. I could see them getting more out of, again, guys who are not going to get the preseason hype, and maybe it's an experienced front court core of Davis and Wagi. Maybe that's very helpful for them. But I don't know with this team. And I think, to me, they're kind of not unlike maybe where I thought they were last year. They're kind of in a similar position outside of just like, okay, there's not a fears here, but I don't know. Like I'm saying that multiple times, but like I really don't have a great feel of what Oklahoma's going to be this season. They may be one of my more unpredictable teams in terms of where they could finish.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to be fascinated to see the Nigel Pack usage potential reclamation project, because obviously he was the poster boy of the NIL is really ruining college basketball when Miami poached him from Kansas State for like $400K a year. And it's like, the best guys in the country are now getting 10X that. And Pack, had some good years at Miami, and then has had, a couple of really not good years, and was basically injured for most of last year, if I remember correctly. Yeah, he played 9 games last year.
Yeah.
The year before that, they were just okay. So yeah, I mean, a good college basketball player who you can run stuff for and do a lot of interesting things with. And he was just on a couple bad teams at the end of his career in Coral Gables. So maybe there's something there, but yeah, it's a whole new roster, and we'll see how Moser decides to deploy it. I'm just going to transition again to another whole new roster, and this is the next tier of someone has to lose games. Texas A&M. I actually kind of sneakily like this roster. I'm just not sure you can bring this much together this quickly, even though I think the coach is good. I'm not sure his style, I'm not sure Bucky's style works in the SEC totally, in the same way. I think he may go through a little bit of the Shaka Smart, oh, I kind of got to dial this back a little bit because we're playing against high major competition every night. We're not, we're not springing traps on people in the A10 or surprising people in the tournament. We just have to play straight up basketball and try to win that way. But you look at Texas A&M's roster. I mean, Pop Isaacs is a viable guard who has never been particularly efficient, but does stuff, scores, gets around the court, gets at the rim. Rylan Griffin played last year with Kansas, was useful, wasn't amazing, decent sort of perimeter outside in jumper guy, not like the world's greatest player. But there are names here. Mackenzie Mbako with Indiana, good perimeter shooter, didn't quite live up to his recruiting ranking when he came over from Duke to Indiana. But I believe he was the Cooper Flag, oh, shoot, I got to get out of here. I'm never going to play. Cooper Flags is coming in. And then Federico, Texas Tech, really good center, a really solid guy. There's just a lot of new stuff to put together here. And with a coach who probably will also be figuring out how to apply his traditional style that got him to this position with all these new guys at the same time. I like it on paper. I'm not sure how quickly it's going to work.
Yeah. So again, my regular listeners will tell you, I have hyped up this Texas A&M team a lot. I do feel like it's one of those where it's just name value versus maybe how I see the pieces fitting together and acclimating to the style.
Names are there for sure.
The names
a lot of college
there.
basketball names right here.
And maybe that's where I'm just getting sold on it. It's just okay, if I see all these names fit, man, they're being way overlooked going into the season. Now, beyond that, I think the top 5 I'm very intrigued by. Now, I don't know beyond that, I don't know what the rotation looks like after your starting 5, because I feel like your starting 5 are about as clear as possibly could be with this team. And so and maybe that's what happens, right? Maybe it is just a little bad luck. Somebody gets injured, something like that. It completely changes your season, I think, for a team like this, because I don't know, again, if the depth's going to be there necessarily. And I don't think, as you mentioned, that they're going to have all those pieces in place to run buckyball in year one. I just don't see it. But I think they went out and got enough talent to where I'm at least going to sit back and be okay, I could see this thing working out really well right off the bat. And maybe that right off the bat doesn't mean, in the first 10 games. Maybe it's more towards the end of the season. They're the kind of team you don't want to play because all of a sudden they found their chemistry. You've gotten big games from some pretty experienced players here. And so I put A&M, and I know we'll circle back around to Mississippi State. We've talked about so many teams, and I just realized we didn't mention them. But I think
they're
A&M
get to them.
and Mississippi State are kind of in the same boat for me where it's like, I think they're the two that, and the other one, I'll tell you why in a minute, why I think Mississippi State's in there, but like, I can see it. I can see the path to them just being like the surprise team. I'm not going to say they're going to be the South Carolina of a couple years ago, but I can see the path for A&M. It's just, it is more of a wait and see though, versus could this thing be a complete disaster if these guys just don't play well together? Maybe, but I tend to be more optimistic and think that they could maybe jump up a category here in terms of being a tournament team in year one for Bucky.
Yeah, I like it. I hope so, because I think that would be really fun just to
Yeah.
watch it come together. And Mbako is a guy I watched obviously a lot at Indiana the last couple of years, and super talented player. Maybe a little miscast as a 3, might make a lot more sense as a 4, spacing the floor from the corner in a system that wants to get up and down and run and force turnovers and play that way, but also not the world's greatest defender. So I don't know how that particularly works, but that's kind of, there may be McMillan is just willing to accept some of those trade-offs in year one and just like, forget it, get the ball, go score, we'll press them again. And then, yeah, you might be right, but like late January, early February, like, oh, this is kind of coming together here. Like they're figuring it out. Okay. Yeah. We skipped Mississippi State just in the list, which is silly to do because I think they're probably, again, a tournament team. Josh Hubbard's back. Jaden Epps, not the most efficient guy, but played well at Georgetown last year. I think the Chris Jan's baseline of we're really tough and kind of old and strong and it's going to be hell to play against us is basically intact, even with a bunch of new guys on the roster.
Yeah, like I bring up this stat all the time, and it's just one of the most fun stats I have. It's like there is only one team in the SEC who the past 3 seasons have won 21 games, finished 9th in the conference, and won 8 conference games. It's Mississippi State. They've done it every single year. No matter where you pick them, like they are right there, and they get to the tournament every single year. And so
there you go.
Again, I
need to adjust my. Hold on, let me adjust my tiers here.
You got to move them up to at least 9th.
Yeah, so no, they're a couple spots too low.
I mean, but it is like and there are some of these teams where I'm like, I don't know how they get there, but it happens, and I think it's just because Jans is a really good coach, and you can kind of bank on some of those things like you talked about with just the, maybe even it's like basketball nerd stuff, like some of those things you can't even measure, right? It's like it's things like that, like they just have a toughness to them. And usually you pretty much guarantee on the defensive end they're not going to be easy to score on. And they're going to go after you on the glass and all those kind of little things that coaches talk about. And now, here we go, add another SEC Player of the Year candidate to the mix, and Josh Hubbard. We talk about attempts on shooting this year. Got to lead the country, in my opinion, in shot attempts.
He's going to fire him up.
Like, this guy, I mean, he's going to get a lot of shots on this team. And that may be good because I think that he's clearly, to me, the best player on the team. And so I feel like, yeah, this is one where he could lead them a long way. And, we kind of saw that last year to where, no, maybe they're not going to get into that upper echelon of teams. But I think when you look at kind of just the ultimate combination they got those kind of guys in the front court, I feel like, that are going to, do the dirty work, do those kind of things we always mention with Chris Jans' teams, whether it's Ballard and so forth. Like, I think probably the biggest question I have for this team is just the combination of Epps and Hubbard. Like, how do those guys play off of each other? What's that look like in the backcourt? But I think they've got some pieces. It just may not, be as attractive on paper as a lot of these other teams are, but you can't deny this consistency so far from Jans and company.
Yeah, no, I wrote about this. It's top of mind for my newsletter tonight, actually, before we got on, I published it. But the ACC SEC Challenge last year, I focused on the North Carolina Alabama game, but when I was writing about Pitt, that was really the game where Pitt's wheels kind of started to come off last year. After that hot start, they went down to Starkville and they got crushed. It was 90-57, and there was a level of toughness and intensity that I think they were not particularly prepared for. And I think you saw the cracks in the early promising Pitt start right there. And that's what Mississippi State can do to you under Chris Jans. Okay. Next is back to the, someone's got to lose games tier. We're down to Georgia here. And I think there's a pretty good chance this team will be a pretty good defensive team, as Mike White's teams usually are. But I do want to pull out something from the Three Man Weaves guys preview on them under their causes of concern, as they sort of go through like, oh yeah, there's some good players and yada yada. Maybe they'll figure it out on offense. They should be really good defensively. Mike White's teams block shots. They get to causes for concern and pull out Evan Miyakawa's numbers on their projected starting lineup in the offense. So they have Ross, Wilkinson, Kane and Catchings, and Cyril as like the prospective starting five. And using Evan's analysis tool, that five would rank 221st in 2-point percentage, 131st in 3-point percentage, 315th in free throw percentage. That would not be a particularly good outcome. So there's a big question here about Georgia's transition to this lineup. A lot of good defenders, probably going to be solid on the back line. Scoring could be an issue.
Yeah, I think so. And that's my thing with this team. I think they will win some games defensively. I just don't know offensively how they're able to kind of keep pace with some of these teams that we've talked about already. And again, like it's like the Mike White thing too, where it's like if you just put the context of what he took over, and for them to make the tournament last year, back-to-back 21 seasons, if he does it again this year, like Georgia absolutely will take that, and as they should. Because,
I mean, Mike White's done a nice job. Like honestly, I think people were. I don't know if they were underwhelmed with the hire. I don't have a hot read on Georgia fans. You would know way better than I would. But he came from a program where he did a reasonably good job. Didn't quite hit the highs they probably would have wanted at Florida. It was time to move on. But where Georgia was, they bottomed out under Tom in their last year there, and he has gotten them back into like a competitive state, mostly year over year to get to the tournament again. Last year they had a nice year. They're losing the guys who basically ran an offense that was already not the most free flowing, turned it over a ton, really relied on offensive rebounds and second chance points, didn't shoot it from three particularly well, and so. You lose some guys there, and now you're looking at a team that's like, you better be one of the best defensive teams in the country because you're going to be playing uphill a little bit.
Yeah, and I think that's it. I'm trying to figure out where the scoring comes from. I mean, Blue Cane, obviously a favorite, but like, I don't know. Like, it's going to be one where I think they're going to have to be pretty rugged in terms of how they win some of these games. Last year they finished it's like top 60 in offensive efficiency. I don't know. I think that's a tall task this year, I think. So if that does happen and they finish, let's say, outside of that considerably, then I think it's like, well, you've got to make sure defensively, and that's where like Cyril, I think will really help them there. Like he's very good to have up front, but I don't know. This is one of those teams where I'm like, if we're going to say the SEC doesn't get 14 in this year, I'm probably not going to hesitate to be like, Georgia's probably one of those teams where I know they made it last year. They made a valiant run at the end. They were 4-10, won their last 4 games in the regular season, got there, but I could see that them not being able to find that same success this year.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, even if you go from whatever they were last year in the 30s in adjusted efficiency to 55th, 60th, you may not win the games you need to get in the tournament. It's not the end of the world. It's just, maybe a bit of a transition year. Okay, last two teams. These are the teams that I call it surprise us. It's a polite way of saying I don't think you're going to be very good, but I could be wrong. You never know. I've been wrong before. We talked about South Carolina, where we thought, a couple years ago, probably not a very good team, and then we're fantastic. But LSU, I would put LSU probably a notch above South Carolina in this group, and that I think they're probably like a top. I don't know where Bart has them off the top of my head, but they're probably like a top 80, top 85 team, whereas South Carolina might be in the 100s to start the season in most preseason rankings or projection systems. But let's just take them both at the same time here real quickly, because we got to wrap up the show. We've been at it for a while, man. These conference preview podcasts are running long. Although I hear that that's not an unpopular thing. So hopefully if you're still listening to this, you're an absolute basketball sicko and we appreciate you. We're going to wrap up with let's talk about LSU first, and then we can talk about South Carolina. Where are you on these teams, and kind of a pivotal year for LSU in that Matt McMahon, I'm not sure that there's like a push to get him out of town necessarily. You have a much better read on these fan bases and kind of where they're at than me, just again reading like the Twitter tea leaves. But it's been a couple years now, and there may be a little bit of impatience happening.
Yeah, and I think these two fit perfectly together in that, there were the reports out there, and again, I don't know the details on this stuff, but about these are two programs who are going to commit to the NIL this offseason, and they're going to make sure, as the two teams who were left out in this historic year for the SEC, they're going to make sure they're on par with everybody else. And it's fine to say that, right? You can still go spend money, but it's just, can you get the players? And, I mean, look, Denton Thomas, I think, is a great addition for LSU. I think he's going to come in and be really good. I think Jalen Reed kind of is your front man in the front court. Like, that's a good place to be. And then you've got, all right, what's the group going to look like of some of the new additions, whether it's, a Sutton, a King, Ron Zipper, I think is an intriguing kind of prospect coming in. That's where I don't know. Like, I don't have a great answer for that. I know, just kind of talking to some people, like, they feel very optimistic that this is the kind of team that can get them back to where they were kind of the year before. But I don't know. Like, I'm not as convinced on that just yet, because I think you want to see how this roster comes together. And when we talk about upside, like, they got a lot of experience on this roster that may help a little bit. But I just, if this is what we do, we have to rank teams on paper to start the season. There could be a South Carolina. It could possibly happen where you have a team that just goes from worst to near the top or something like that. But it's hard not to put LSU in the bottom tier, just because, you kind of feel like, I don't know that they can get there. Although I did make one of my bold predictions at some point this summer. We're trying to come up with predictions. I'm like, I think LSU can get to the tournament. I'm not saying that's the expectation. I think they can get there, just because it's an SEC, right? That you have a lot of teams. But, and a lot of teams are going to have a chance to get in the tournament. But I just, is that the expectation? I don't know. But I can see a path for them to be one of those, let's say 9, 10 type seeds, something like that. But, like, best case scenario, is that it? Or, are they a top 5 seed or something? It's hard to imagine that right now.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, I think of the two teams, you just look up and down the roster, there's probably a better chance with LSU than South Carolina, right? I don't see it at South Carolina particularly. I can conceptualize a world in which LSU comes together, Thomas is good, and there's a slight development sort of collectively here. I mean, it's a lot of guys who have played a lot of minutes at a lot of different places. Again, sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. I think there's an inherent risk there, particularly when you're getting them from, this is not Kentucky's transfers, right? These are guys who are coming from smaller schools, your Portlands, your Northeasterns, your Omahas. But, you never know. It could come together, and there's talent there. But the South Carolina one, I look at this roster, and I'm just kind of like, Michi Johnson, fine. But other than that, I'm not seeing, the case that I can make to myself or other people.
So, we talked to Lamont Paris a couple of weeks ago, and, I think the main theme I got from him was that, listen, we obviously understand a drastic difference between the team 2 seasons ago and the one last year. And so we wanted to find a way to go back and let's try to build this roster as closely as we can to a couple years ago, right? It's an impossible task, but you do the best you can with it. And so getting Michi back, like, that's a nice addition. You have Miles Studi. Those two have played together a lot of games, but they need Studi to take a step forward to where he was a couple years ago. And then it's like, well, you're not going to have a lot of teams that are going to play a 6'9", 2-guard or whatever in Taram Jams. And so it's like, all right, you got some things that can separate you a little bit if you're South Carolina. And then, talented freshmen like an Eli Ellis and people like that. Cam Scott's still there. I mean, I think it's easy to forget, like, how highly touted he was coming into last year. And so can he take a big jump now as a sophomore? But then it
was not a particularly good freshman.
It wasn't. And so I'm like, how do they use him this year? Because I'm looking at the minutes distribution. I'm like, I don't see where a lot of those minutes are going to come from based on those top 3 guys I mentioned. But then I'm like the front court. And I think that's where I have the biggest question. It's like, I know they brought in like Capich comes over from San Diego and all that, but I don't know. Like this is a league too, where like so many plays are made at the rim. Historically, the SEC is not a great 3-point shooting team or 3-point shooting league. Usually finishing like 24th, 25th, or lower every year among conferences in 3-point shooting. A lot of plays are going to be made at the rim. Guys get in foul trouble. I go back to laughing about how many free throws were shot in the SEC. It's just the style. And I don't know if they can kind of, in games like that, where you have so many kind of attacking type teams, I'm just curious to see, can they be good enough up front? And maybe a Jordan Butler has a big season or something. It's possible. But I think that's where, if there's going to be something that holds them back to the point to where they can't make that jump into the NCAA tournament, I think that's where your questions probably begin.
Yeah. And look, I mean, they finished top 50 in defense last year.
Yeah.
Important to note that they had Colin Murray-Boyles on the team.
Exactly. And I didn't even mention that, but I'm like, there's no one on this roster that is going to be able to be that guy, right? And so you're having to completely change your approach and all that, and it's a completely different deal now.
Yeah. I mean, look, and Murray-Boyles was awesome. He's a guy who slipped, frankly, a fair amount under my radar last year, just because I feel like the stuff he did best is the kind of stuff that it's not easy to package into a highlight.
Right.
If you got 5 different games on of a night and you're trying to keep up on everything that's going on across the country as I attempt to, you're not locking in on Colin Murray-Boyles footage, but you get into the draft process and all these NBA teams are like, yeah, this guy's awesome. He's like the best defender in the draft. And he also does some good stuff on offense that we like. And like, oh, right. Like that's why they were competitive on the defensive end last year in a lot of ways. And it's just really hard to replace him. Okay. That's where we are on the SEC. Blake, thank you so much for being here. I think we basically covered the SEC in podcast form as in-depth as I ever want to do again. We pretty much nailed it. I think we got the level of depth that we're looking for here. And it was really good. Why don't you tell folks where to check out your work and the stuff you guys are doing?
Yeah, again, don't discount that these days in the SEC, it's a lot easier for those fans to listen to a 2+ hour podcast than it was.
Oh, that wasn't an SEC comment. That was mostly I'm just old and tired.
Well, you and me both. Yeah. So if you go to Southeastern 16, of course, you can find us on YouTube, any podcast app you use. You can find all of our SEC basketball stuff there. We've been covering it year round for years now, and so you can check all that out in the midst of course, the football season, baseball, all that stuff in the SEC. Very popular sports, as we know, but yeah, a lot of SEC basketball stuff over there. So find it, Southeastern 16 YouTube or podcast, and you can also follow me on Twitter /X at the Blake Lovell.
Yeah, popped on the live stream when the Bruce Pearl stuff happened, and it was a nice place to sit and collect some thoughts and hear what you all had to think and say about it. Thank you very much for coming on the show. Please check out Blake's stuff. Thank you to all of you for listening. Thank you to our producer, Corey Aldis. Thank you to our graphic designer, Sam Freyer. Thanks to everyone at Basket Under Review. Thanks to our sponsor, Homefield. We will be back next week with another show. Bye-bye.